The laughter is still frozen in these walls. You can almost hear it if you stand still long enough. That old sound of people at the gate who are so sure. Welcome on board, chosen one. Sit down, breathe once, slow, and let your shoulders drop from where the years have kept them. My name is Marcus, and before we finish, you are going to learn the exact moment your life stopped being about survival and became something already decided. A moment you lived through without ever feeling it happen. 15 truths stand between you and that moment. Count them as they come. For longer than I care to count, I have watched people break and watched people rise, and I learned to tell the difference in the first 10 seconds. You are the second kind. You always were. You just hadn't been told yet. Picture an empty workshop at dawn. Cold iron on the racks, ash still warm in the forge from the night before, and a single door standing open to the grey morning light. There is a man standing in that doorway with his back to the world, and behind him, faint, you can still hear it. Laughter. The laughter of people who once stood at the gate of that workshop and swore he would never make it. That sound has soaked into the walls. It hangs in the cold air like smoke that refuses to clear. And here is the thing about that doorway, chosen one, the thing I will not explain to you yet. That man is not there to remember the laughter. He is there because the laughter was the first tool he was ever handed. He just didn't know it at the time. Hold that image, that workshop, that doorway, that laughter frozen in the walls. We are going to come back to it at the very end, and when we do, you will understand something about your own life that you have been circling for years without ever landing on. Funny how loud they were. Back then, back when the crowd at the gate had opinions about a man who owned nothing but a pair of hands and a refusal to quit. They were so certain. They spoke in that easy, careless way people speak when they believe the future belongs to them and not to you. And now? Now those same voices have gone quiet. Not polite quiet, not respectful quiet. The other kind. The kind that arrives when the people who mocked you begin to suspect they measured you wrong, and the suspicion sits in their stomach like cold water. They hate that feeling. They hate that they can't take it back. They hate that the joke stopped being funny somewhere along the way, and nobody told them exactly when. Let me translate what they were really saying to you back then, because you deserve to hear it decoded. When they said you were dreaming too big, they meant you were reaching past the height they had settled for, and your reach embarrassed them. When they said, be realistic, they meant, please stay small enough that we don't have to look at what we gave up on. When they laughed and said, he'll never make it, what they were actually confessing was that they had already decided they never would, and they needed you to prove them right. You were supposed to be their evidence. You were supposed to fail so their own failure would feel like wisdom. That doesn't tell you a thing about your future. It tells you everything about theirs. Now let me name the things you carried, because I will not pretend they didn't cost you. You know the ache of being underestimated by people who never bothered to look closely. You know what it is to be laughed at in a room, to feel the heat crawl up your neck while you pretend it doesn't touch you. You know betrayal, the specific kind that comes not from strangers, but from the ones who ate at your table. You know loneliness, the long stretch of nights where you wondered if you were the only one who could still see the thing you were reaching for. And you know the quiet humiliation of being counted out, of hearing your name spoken like a punchline. These are not small wounds. I will not insult them by rushing past. They were real. They marked you. Hold them for a moment exactly as they are. Before we go any deeper, touch that like button. Not for me, That's how the universe marks that you were here, that you showed up for the version of yourself you're about to meet. And now stay with me, because we are only at the doorway. Here is a question I want you to carry, one you can't answer in a single sentence, because the answer is the whole story. Why is it that the very thing they laughed at, the very trait they called your weakness, was already the tool that would one day put them under your command, and you didn't even notice it happening? Sit with that. Because there was a moment, one specific moment, when the universe quietly moved you from the column marked loser to the column marked untouchable, and you almost certainly didn't feel it when it happened. We'll find that moment together near the end when you're ready to hold it. But first, understand this shift. The laughter stopped. And you thought, maybe, that it stopped because they matured, because they moved on, because the world got busy. No. Listen closely. That silence is not peace. That silence is their fear. People laugh at what they believe can't touch them. They go quiet when they realize it can. The day the jokes died was the day they understood what you were becoming, and understanding is the beginning of dread. You didn't earn their silence by begging. You earned it by outgrowing the size they had assigned you. They can't laugh anymore. Good. Here is where most people turn back. Not from this video, from their own lives. Right at this exact threshold, where the truth about their worth starts to come into focus, most people flinch and reach for something comfortable. Because comfort is easier than facing how long they were lied to about themselves. Comfort says, stay small, it's safer. Truth says, you were never small, you were compressed. Most walk away from that, but you're still here, and you're not here by accident, chosen one. Nothing about the way you found these words was random. You were rooted here, the way water is rooted downhill, by a design older than your doubts. So do something with that. In the comments, leave the number 777. Not for luck, not because it's a trend. Leave it as a signal, a mark that says you felt the shift in your chest when I described it, that you know I'm not talking about someone else. Because if you truly are one of the chosen, you already feel it right now. That pressure behind the ribs, that recognition. That's not excitement, that's memory. Something in you remembering what it always knew. And keep that pressure with you, because the first real truth about why they can't sleep at night, the deepest reason their laughter turned to silence, I'm going to hand you a little later. First, you need to understand something else, something about the mockery itself. Because you have been carrying that laughter around as a wound when it was always something else entirely. Number 1. The mockery was never an insult, it was a map. Picture a blade held over open flame in a dark forge. The fire doesn't hate the steel, the fire is shaping it. Every degree of heat that looks like punishment is actually instruction, telling the metal exactly where it is soft, exactly where it must harden. That is what their laughter was. Every joke they threw was heat, and every place their mockery landed was a place the universe was marking for reinforcement. You thought they were tearing you down. They were showing you the map of everything you needed to build. You might ask yourself, isn't that just a comforting story I tell to feel better about being hurt? No. Watch how it actually works. When they laughed at your ambition, they told you precisely where your ambition lived and how much of it there was to threaten them. When they mocked the way you kept trying after failing, they revealed that persistence was the trait they could not match and therefore had to ridicule. People do not mock what is beneath them. They mock what frightens them from below. Every point of contact was a coordinate. Follow the mockery backward, and it leads straight to your strengths, laid out like a treasure map drawn by people who didn't realize they were drawing it. I've watched this play out more times than I can hold in memory. I've seen it in the quiet ones who got laughed out of rooms and came back years later owning the building. I've watched the exact same trait get called foolish at 20 and visionary at 40, and nothing changed except the results. I remember one man in particular, years back, a man everyone at the gate had written off, who told me once that he kept a mental list of every insult thrown at him. Not to nurse the pain, to use it. He treated each one as a note that said, "Work here. This is where they can't follow." That list became his blueprint. He built his entire life on the coordinates his enemies handed him for free. That trait they laughed at, the stubbornness, the intensity, the refusal to read the room and shrink. That wasn't a flaw. That was the raw ore. Softness gets you liked. Hardness gets you built. You were never too much. You were early. The world just hadn't caught up to the size of what you were carrying, and small people always mistake earliness for error. The map was in their mouths the whole time, and they hate that they drew it. And this is where it connects, because the map only matters if someone follows it, and the ones who followed you out of your life were following it too, though they'd never admit it. Number 2. Their doubt was a signal, not a verdict. Here is the truth they'll never admit. Doubt from a small mind is not information about your ceiling. It is information about theirs. When someone tells you that you can't, they are not reading your future. They are reading the limits of their own imagination and mistaking those limits for the edge of the world. A person who has never left the valley cannot tell you what's beyond the mountain. They can only tell you they've never seen it. That is not a verdict on your journey. That is a confession about the length of theirs. Picture a snowbound peak in the distance, and a crowd standing in the valley calling it impossible. They aren't lying exactly. From where they stand, in the low ground, the peak really does look unreachable. But you are never meant to judge the climb from the valley floor. You are meant to climb. The moment their doubt reached you as a signal instead of a sentence, everything changed, because you stopped asking them for the weather report on a mountain they'd never touched. You might tell yourself, but so many of them doubted me, surely that many people can't be wrong. Stop. That's the oldest trap there is. The size of a crowd has never once determined the truth of a thing. 1,000 people in the valley are still in the valley. 10,000 voices telling you it can't be done are 10,000 people describing their own position, not yours. The universe does not tally votes. It tracks trajectory, and yours was always pointed up, which is exactly why the valley found it so offensive. I learned this myself the long way, over years of watching who ended up where. The loudest doubters were almost never the strongest people. They were the most afraid, and fear is loud precisely because it is trying to drown out the sound of its own smallness. I stopped taking doubt as data about the doubted a long time ago. I started reading it as a thermometer for the doubter. The more heated their certainty that you'll fail, the more terrified they secretly are that you won't. So when they doubted you, they weren't measuring your limit, they were broadcasting theirs. And the day you learned to hear the difference was the day their words lost every ounce of power they'd ever held over you. That's a signal flare, lit by frightened hands, showing you exactly where the edge of ordinary ends and where you begin. And the ones who lit those flares brightest, the ones who doubted you loudest to your face, many of them were the same ones who would soon walk out of your life entirely. And that departure did more for you than their loyalty ever could have. Number 3. Everyone who left was sharpening you. Here is the part that will sting before it heals. Some of the people who walked away from you didn't abandon you. They completed a function. There is a version of your story where they stayed, and in that version you never became this. Their leaving was not the tragedy you framed it as in the small hours of those long nights. It was subtraction that made room. It was weight coming off a climber who was about to ascend somewhere they were never built to go. Picture a hand and a whetstone, drawing a blade across it again and again, and with every pass, a little of the steel is worn away. It looks like loss. Metal is leaving. But what's being removed is only the dullness, the excess, the part that could never hold an edge. The people who left took nothing from you that could cut. They took only the softness that was keeping you blunt. Every departure was another pass across the stone. You might ask yourself, then why did it hurt so much if it was good for me? Because sharpening is not gentle, chosen one. The stone does not whisper apologies to the blade. Betrayal from someone you trusted is one of the deepest wounds a person can carry, and I will never tell you it shouldn't have hurt. It should have. It did. But pain and damage are not the same thing. The stone hurts the steel, and the steel comes off keener. What felt like the end of you was the removal of everything that wasn't sharp enough to survive where you were going. I have watched people spend a decade mourning the exit of someone who was, in truth, the exact anchor keeping them from open water. I remember watching it in my own life, though it took me years to say it plainly. The relationships I grieved hardest were often the ones that, once gone, let me finally move at the speed I was built for. It's an ugly thing to admit that some losses are gifts, but the honest ones among us know it. The people who left didn't break your story. They edited it, cutting the parts that were slowing the plot toward you. And here's the deeper cut, the reason their bedrooms are so quiet at night now, though I promised I'd hand you the fullest version of that later, so hold it a moment longer. The ones who walked away did it believing they were leaving a sinking thing. Watching that thing rise without them is a particular kind of torment. They didn't just lose you, they lost the story they told themselves about being right to go. They sharpened you and called it leaving. The blade doesn't chase the stone. The blade just gets sharper and waits. Number 4, solitude was not punishment, it was assembly. Notice what actually happened in those long stretches when no one came. You were not being abandoned by the world, you were being assembled away from its noise. There is a reason the most dangerous things are built in isolation, in workshops with the doors closed, far from the crowd that would have flinched at the sparks. You spent seasons alone, not because you were unwanted, but because what was being made in you could not be made under observation. The crowd would have interrupted. The crowd would have voted. And some things cannot survive a vote. Picture a single seed buried deep in cold winter soil, sealed in darkness, showing nothing above the surface. To anyone walking past that patch of ground, it looks like nothing is happening. It looks like barren dirt with nothing left in it. But down in that dark, in that silence no eye can reach, the entire root system of what will one day break the surface is being written, thread by thread, in a place designed to be invisible. That was your solitude. From the outside it looked like a man forgotten. Underground, foundations were spreading. And the ones who wrote you off during that silence made the exact error a passerby makes over buried ground. They mistook the sealed dark for an empty field. You might ask yourself, but doesn't everyone need people? Isn't isolation supposed to break a person down? For most, yes. Loneliness hollows the ones who have nothing being built inside them. It caves them in because there's no structure holding the walls apart. But you weren't hollow in there, chosen one. You were dense. You were compacting. The same pressure that crushes an empty can turns carbon into something that cuts glass, and the difference is entirely a matter of what was inside when the pressure came. You had something inside. The solitude didn't crush it, it compressed it into something that could survive at depths where softer things implode. I know this ground personally, and I'll be honest with you because I've earned the right to be. There were years in my own life I spent almost entirely alone, and for a long time I read that solitude as a failure, as proof that something in me repelled people. It took me the better part of a decade to understand what had actually happened in those quiet years. I hadn't been rejected, I'd been sequestered. Everything I use now, everything that lets me see through people in 10 seconds, was assembled in rooms where no one else was present. The loneliness I once resented turned out to be the most productive stretch of my entire life. I just couldn't read the machine while I was still inside it being built. That's why the solitude felt like exile and became elevation. You went in alone and came out assembled. The crowd that avoided the buried ground never got to be part of what emerged. They only get to stand there later and watch it break the surface, full grown, in a season they thought was dead. And once you were assembled, once the roots had spread in the dark, a new weapon came online, one they never saw coming, because it makes no sound at all. Number 5. Your patience terrified them more than any threat. Watch what happens to a small opponent when they meet a person who is not in a hurry. Loud enemies understand loud responses. They know how to fight someone who reacts, someone who lashes out, someone who bleeds when poked. What they cannot process, what genuinely unsettles them, is stillness. When you refuse to rush, when you refuse to take the bait, when you let their provocations land and simply did not flinch, you became something they had no strategy against. Rage they can bait. Panic they can exploit. Patience they cannot touch. It sits there, calm and calibrated, and it terrifies them because it means you are operating on a timeline they can't see the end of. Picture the hands of an old clock, moving so slowly you cannot catch them, while every gear behind the face turns in perfect order towards a moment already set. The clock is not frozen. The clock is precise. It is not waiting because it has stopped. It is waiting because the mechanism has already decided when the hour will strike, and the hour has not yet arrived. That was your patience. To them it looked like passivity. In truth, it was a mechanism refusing to waste a single tick until the tick would count. And what unnerves people most is a stillness that is clearly counting something they can't see. You might ask yourself, but didn't my patience just let them get ahead? Didn't they win all those rounds while I waited? Look closer. They didn't win those rounds. They spent themselves in those rounds. Every time they moved and you didn't, they burned energy and revealed strategy and got nothing in return because there was nothing there to hit. They mistook your stillness for surrender and kept attacking empty air, exhausting themselves against a target that wasn't where they thought it was. Meanwhile, you were reading everything. You learned their patterns, their tells, their limits, all for free, while they learned nothing about you because you gave them nothing to study. I've watched patience win more contests than force ever did. I used to think, when I was younger, that the person who moved first controlled the fight. Years of watching taught me the opposite. The person who can wait longest controls the fight, because waiting is a form of power that most people simply do not possess. It requires a certainty about the outcome that terrified people can never fake. When you can afford to wait, you are telling everyone watching that you already know how this ends. And nothing empties a room of confidence faster than an opponent who acts like the result is already decided. Your patience wasn't slowness. It was certainty wearing the mask of calm. They kept swinging up the calm and hitting nothing, and every miss cost them a little more of the nerve they'd need for the day you finally moved. And here is the part I promised you earlier, the deepest reason they can't sleep, the thing beneath all the surface reasons. It isn't your success that haunts them, it's the timing of it. They watched you wait and wait and wait, and they told themselves your patience was defeat. Then it turned out to be aim. Now every quiet person they meet unsettles them, because you taught them, personally, that stillness is not safety. You cured them of the comfort of underestimating the quiet. They lie awake, wondering who else is waiting. That's the bedsheet they can't stop twisting. That's the answer to the question I left hanging in the dark. Their sleeplessness was never about what you did. It was about what your patience proved possible. They feared the storm. They should have feared the calm, because the calm chose the day. And the calm had a partner, a second weapon working right alongside it, one so quiet most people never recognize it as power at all. Number 6. Your silence became the loudest thing in the room. Ever notice how the noisy fall apart the moment you stop feeding them? When you stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending, stopped handing them the reactions they came to collect, you didn't go weak. You went untouchable. A person who explains is a person still asking to be understood, still hoping the crowd will grant permission for their existence. The day you stopped asking was the day you stopped being available for judgment. You removed yourself from the court entirely, and a defendant who leaves the courtroom cannot be convicted. Your silence wasn't absence, it was withdrawal of consent. Picture a vast, still lake at first light, and someone standing at the edge shouting across it, their voice bouncing back at them off the flat water. The lake does not answer. It does not argue. It simply reflects the shouting back at the one who made it, so that every insult they hurl returns to their own ears in their own voice. That is what your silence became. People who came to provoke you found themselves standing at the edge of something that would not react, hearing only the echo of their own noise, and there is nothing more unsettling to a loud person than the sound of their own words coming back unanswered. You might ask yourself, but doesn't silence just let them say whatever they want about me? Shouldn't I have defended myself? Here's what you learned that they never will. The moment you defend, you confirm that their opinion has weight. You hand them the very power you're trying to protect against. Silence does the opposite. Silence says your words did not reach anything that matters. Nothing insults a person who lives for reactions more than being treated as though their reaction didn't register. You didn't lose those arguments by refusing to have them. You made the arguments impossible to win, because a fight requires 2 participants, and you had already left. I spent years learning to hold my tongue, and I'll tell you it was the hardest weapon I ever forged. Everything in me wanted to explain, to correct the record, to make them see. It took me a long time to understand that the need to be understood is a leash, and small people love to hold it. The day I stopped pulling against that leash was the day it fell off my neck entirely. I watched the same thing happen to that man from the forge, the one who kept the list of insults. When he stopped responding, his enemies didn't relax. They panicked. His silence made them feel invisible, and invisibility is the one thing the loud cannot bear. Your silence spoke in a register they couldn't hear but couldn't stop feeling. It filled the room while you said nothing. It made them louder and smaller at the same time, shouting across a lake that only gave them back their own voices. That's you removing the fight's oxygen and watching it die without laying a hand on it. And the silence, the patience, the solitude, the sharpening, all of it was pointing towards something you still hadn't been shown. A truth so complete that once it lands, you will never again read your own past the same way. But you're not quite ready for it. First, you need to see what was happening to them while all this was happening to you, because the two stories were always the same story, told from opposite ends. Number 7. Being underestimated was the greatest armor you never asked for. Look at what they handed you every time they counted you out. They gave it for free, over and over, for years, and never once knew they were giving it. When people expect nothing from you, they stop watching you. They stop guarding against you. They leave every door unlocked, because who bothers to defend against a threat they've already dismissed? Being underestimated is not an insult, chosen one. It is camouflage of the highest order, the kind that money cannot buy and status cannot grant. You move through the world invisible to the very people who should have been most afraid of you, and their contempt was the cloak that made it possible. Picture an iceberg drifting silent through cold water, and above the surface only a small, pale shape, easy to dismiss, easy to sail past. The ones who mocked you saw only that pale shape. They measured you by the fraction that broke the surface and laughed at how small it looked. What they never accounted for was the mass beneath the waterline, the enormous hidden weight of everything you'd been assembling in the dark, silent, and patient. They steered straight toward you because they thought there was nothing there, and what sinks ships is never the part you can see. You might ask yourself, but wouldn't it have been better if people had believed in me, if they'd seen my potential from the start? No. Think about what belief would have cost you. If they had seen you coming, they would have prepared. They would have blocked the doors, closed the gaps, guarded the openings you eventually walked straight through. Their underestimation kept you off their radar during the exact years you needed to move unwatched. Recognition too early is a spotlight, and a spotlight makes you a target. You got to build in the dark precisely because no one thought the dark was worth watching. I have seen this dynamic decide entire lives. The ones who were praised early often crumbled under the surveillance of everyone's expectations, while the ones written off moved freely, unobserved, and arrived somewhere the praised ones never reached. I felt it in my own path more than once. The people who dismissed me were the ones I learned to read most completely, because they never bothered to hide anything from someone they didn't respect. Contempt makes people careless. They show you everything when they think you're no one, and I collected all of it, quietly, while they laughed. Their low estimate of you wasn't a wound. It was a blind spot they carved into their own vision, and you lived inside it, growing, until the day you stepped out of it fully formed, and there was nothing left for them to do about it. You weren't overlooked. You were undercover. And the mission was almost complete before they even knew there was a mission. And while you moved unseen beneath their waterline, something was happening on their side of the story, something you were too focused to notice. But I want you to see it now. Number 8. Their comfort was quietly rotting while you were building. Here's the part that changes how you read every one of those years. While you were struggling in the dark, doing the unglamorous work, failing and rising and failing and rising, they were resting on the comfort of a head start that was slowly turning against them. Comfort feels like winning in the moment. It feels like proof that you chose the smarter path. But comfort is a slow softening. Every year they spent coasting on what came easy was a year their edge dulled, their hunger faded, their capacity for the hard thing atrophied from disuse. They were getting comfortable. You were getting dangerous. and those two directions were never going to end in the same place. Picture two seeds planted the same season. One drops into rich, easy soil and shoots up fast, tall and green, admired by everyone who passes, roots barely bothering to reach because the water is right there. The other lands in hard, cracked ground and has to drive its roots down through stone, slow, painful, invisible, spending years going deep instead of tall. Then the storm comes, and the tall, easy one, with its shallow roots, goes over in the first strong wind, while the one that fought the stone stands, because everything that made its early life harder made its foundation unbreakable. Their comfort grew them tall and rootless. Your struggle grew you slow and anchored. You might ask yourself, but they had every advantage. Didn't the easy path just let them get further ahead? For a while, yes. And that while is exactly the trap. The head start is the most dangerous thing you can give a person who hasn't earned their roots, because it convinces them they never need to grow any. They spent their advantage instead of building on it. They mistook the easy years for permanent ones. And when conditions changed, and conditions always change, they had no depth to fall back on, nothing driven down through the stone, nothing holding them when the wind came for what they'd assumed was guaranteed. I've watched the comfortable lose to the hungry more times than I can count, and it almost never looks like a dramatic reversal. It looks like slow erosion. The comfortable don't notice they're softening because softening feels like relaxing, and relaxing feels good. Meanwhile, the ones grinding in the hard ground don't notice they're becoming unstoppable because struggle feels like struggle right up until the moment it reveals itself as strength. I lived on the hard ground side for years, and I promise you, I envied the easy soil the whole time, not understanding that I was being rooted while they were being hollowed. Their head start was a countdown, not a victory. Every comfortable year drew them closer to the storm they had no roots for. And you, cracking stone in the dark, were becoming the only thing left standing when it hit. Good. And here is the truth I told you was coming. The one that changes everything, the one you weren't ready for until now, because you had to see both sides of the story first. There was a single truth underneath all of this, and it's next. Number 9. There was a moment the game changed, and you didn't feel it. Here is the truth they'll never admit, the one that keeps them up in ways even the patience and the silence didn't. Somewhere along the way, without any announcement, without any signal you could see, the game stopped being about whether you would make it and became about how far you would go. The question flipped. It flipped in the universe first, in the deep architecture of things, long before it flipped in the visible world. There was a specific moment, a quiet, unremarkable moment, when you crossed from the column marked "Will he" to the column marked "How much?" And the terrible, beautiful thing about it is that you almost certainly didn't feel it happen. Picture a chessboard mid-game, and one player is still playing to survive, while the other has quietly, several moves back, transitioned to playing to win. Nothing on the board looks decided. The pieces are still scattered, the outcome still seems open. But one player is now setting traps, and the other is still just trying to stay alive, and the difference is invisible until it's total. That was the moment. Not a trophy, not a headline, not a single visible triumph. A shift in what you were playing for, buried inside an ordinary day that changed every move that came after it. You stopped playing not to lose and started playing to win, and you may not even be able to name the day it happened. You might ask yourself, if it was so important, how could I have missed it? How could the biggest turn in my life pass me by? Because the most important shifts are never loud, chosen one. The loud moments are for the crowd. The real ones happen in silence, in a decision you made and forgot, in a night you refused to quit when quitting would have been reasonable, in a morning you got up one more time than made sense. The universe does not send a bulletin when it reclassifies you. It just quietly moves your file from one drawer to another and lets the results catch up over the following years. You felt the results eventually. You never felt the reclassification. That's why it feels like luck now. It wasn't luck. It was a decision the universe made about you on a day you can't remember. I've spent my life looking for those moments in people, the exact hinge where the story turned, and the strangest thing I've learned is that the person it happened to is almost always the last to know. I can often see the hinge in someone's past more clearly than they can see it themselves, because they were inside it, living it as an ordinary Tuesday, while from the outside it was the day everything changed. For them, it felt like nothing. Looking back, it was the pivot the whole life turned on. So, somewhere in your story, there is a moment like that. A day you'd call unremarkable, and it was the day the game changed. The day the universe stopped asking whether and started measuring how far. You didn't feel the ground shift because you were the one standing on it, moving with it, part of the shift itself. That's not luck arriving late. That's a verdict that was passed long ago, finally becoming visible. And once you understand that the verdict is already in, everything left is just the world slowly finding out what was decided about you in the dark. But there is one more layer beneath even this, one final truth that pulls the whole thing together, and I'll bring you to it soon. First, there is something about the very thing that once nearly broke you, something you need to see turned all the way around. Number 10. The thing that nearly broke you became the thing they can't compete with. Here is the truth they'll never admit. The wound you were most ashamed of, the experience you spent years wishing had never happened to you, the breaking point you were certain had ruined you for good, turned out to be the one thing none of them can replicate. They can copy your methods, they can imitate your moves, they can study what you do and try to do the same, but they cannot manufacture what you survived, because the only way to have it is to have been through it, and they took the easy road specifically to avoid it. The thing that nearly broke you is now the thing they can never build, because you cannot fake having been to the bottom, and the bottom is where you found the only tool that matters. Picture broken pottery, its cracks filled with gold, held up to the light so the seams glow. The bowl was shattered once. Anyone can see where it came apart. But instead of hiding the breaks, someone poured gold into every fracture, and now the very lines of its breaking are the most valuable thing about it, worth more whole and gold-veined than it ever was before it broke. That is what happened to you. The places you cracked are now the places you shine. The damage became the design. And a bowl that was never broken, however perfect, will never have those golden seams, because you cannot pour gold into a crack that was never there. You might ask yourself, how can the worst thing that happened to me be an advantage? Isn't that just a story I tell to survive the memory? No, chosen one. It is the most literal truth in this entire story. The people competing with you now have never been where you've been. They have never been counted out completely, never lost everything that mattered, never had to rebuild from a place where rebuilding seemed impossible. That means they have never developed the one capacity that only that place can give you, the ability to keep moving when there is no reason left to. They break at the first real pressure because they've never been broken and reassembled. You don't, because you already know the breaking isn't the end. You've been there. You have a map of the bottom. They're terrified of a place you've already lived. I've watched this be the deciding factor at the highest levels, higher than talent, higher than resources, higher than any advantage you can name. When everything gets hard, and it always eventually gets hard, the ones who have survived their own destruction have a calm the untested cannot fake. I know it in myself. The seasons that nearly ended me are the exact seasons I now draw from when everything is on the line, because I've already been to the place they're afraid of, and I know it doesn't kill you. That knowledge is not a technique. It cannot be taught in a room. It can only be earned in the dark, and you paid the full price. The wound became the weapon, and the break became the gold that now runs through everything you build. And now they stand across from someone carrying a strength they can never acquire, because the entrance fee is a journey through hell they spent their whole lives avoiding. That's an advantage they can never buy at any price, and they know it every time they look at you. And this brings us to the edge of the deepest truth, the one beneath all the others, the one I've been leading you toward since the doorway of that cold workshop. Number 11. You were never behind. You were on a different clock entirely. All those years you thought you were behind, comparing your position to theirs and coming up short, measuring your progress against people who seemed so far ahead. You were making one fundamental error. You assumed you were both running the same race on the same clock toward the same finish line. You were not. You were never on their timeline. You were on a completely different clock, one calibrated to a destination they can't even see, and measuring your pace against theirs was like a marathon runner panicking that the sprinters had pulled ahead in the first 100 meters. Of course they were ahead early. They were running a different, shorter race. Picture a long-exposure photograph of the night sky, and in it every star has traced a slow arc of light across the frame, each one moving on a timescale so vast it makes the frantic blink of everything below seem like nothing. The stars are not late. The stars are not behind. They are simply operating on a clock so much larger that the rushing things beneath them are irrelevant to their motion. That was you the whole time, moving slowly, deliberately, on a scale the sprinters couldn't perceive, and mistaking your own vastness for slowness because you kept comparing it to things that flare and fade in an instant. You might ask yourself, but how do I know I wasn't just slow? How do I know behind wasn't simply behind? Because behind is a position on someone else's track, and you were never on their track. The proof is in where their speed took them versus where your pace is taking you. They arrived quickly at a small place. You are still arriving, slowly, at a vast one that keeps opening wider the further you go. The ones who raced ahead reached the finish line they were built for and stopped, because that was the whole distance they had in them. You never hit a finish line early because your race was never that short. What felt like falling behind was actually the first stretch of a distance most people don't even have the endurance to imagine, let alone run. I spent years tormented by timelines, watching people my age arrive at things I hadn't reached, certain that meant something was wrong with me. It took me a long time to understand that I wasn't running late. I was running long. The people I envied for their early arrival had, in many cases, simply reached the end of their road, while I was still on the on-ramp of something with no visible end. Comparison nearly cost me everything, not because I was behind, but because I kept trying to read a marathon clock with a sprinter's stopwatch, and the numbers made no sense until I understood they were never meant to be the same instrument. You were never behind, chosen one. You are on a clock they can't read, running a distance they can't fathom, toward a destination that makes their finish line look like a starting block. The slowness you grieved was the scale of your own reach, mistaken for delay. And now, having seen that, you're ready for the final turn, the moment the whole story completes itself and the laughter at the gate reveals what it always was. Number 12. The point of no return is already behind you. Here is the truth they'll never admit, and the one that ends their hope entirely. There was a point past which you could no longer be stopped, a threshold beyond which the outcome became inevitable. And here is what should settle something deep in your chest right now. You have already crossed it. It is behind you. Whatever happens next, whatever they try, whatever obstacles remain, the fundamental question of whether you become what you are meant to become has already been answered. And it was answered yes, and it can no longer be unanswered. The point of no return is not ahead of you as some distant hope. It is in your past, already sealed. Picture a rocket the instant after launch, when the clamps have released and the ground has begun to fall away, and there is a specific second in that ascent past which returning to the pad is no longer possible. Before that second, an abort is an option. After it, there is only up. That second has happened for you. The clamps have released. The ground is already falling away beneath you. You may still feel the shaking, you may still feel the pressure, but the one thing that is no longer on the table is going back down to the pad you launched from. That option closed. You are committed to the sky now, carried there by a threshold already crossed, not by any choice you have to keep making moment to moment. You might ask yourself, how can I be sure I've crossed it? What if the point of no return is still ahead of me, and I fail before I reach it? Here is how you know. The very fact that you are here, hearing this, recognizing yourself in every word, feeling that pressure behind your ribs, is the evidence. The ones still on the pad don't feel this. They don't recognize this. This story would mean nothing to someone who hadn't already launched, because you can only recognize the truth of the ascent once you're inside it. The recognition itself is the proof. You feel this because it's already describing you, and it can only describe you if you've already crossed the line it's describing. I've learned to spot the launched ones with near total accuracy, and it has nothing to do with where they are on the visible climb. Some of them are still low, still shaking, still surrounded by people who assume they'll fall back. But there's a quality to a person who has crossed the threshold, a settledness underneath the struggle, a knowing that persists even through the hardest stretches. I recognized it in myself only in hindsight, long after the moment had passed. The way you realize you crossed a border only when you notice the landscape has changed and there's no road back to the country you left. The point of no return is behind you, chosen one. The outcome is no longer in question. What remains is not whether you rise, but how completely you do. And that is the only question left, because the fundamental one has already been decided in your favor. Sealed, irreversible, done. They're still hoping you'll fall back to the pad. They don't understand the clamps released years ago. There is only up now. And what waits at the top of that climb is the exact reversal they never saw coming. The moment I've been walking you toward since the very first breath of this story. Number 13. The ones who mocked you will need you, and that is the cruelest reversal of all. Here is the truth they'll never admit, not even to themselves in the dark. The day is coming, and for some of you it has already arrived, when the very people who laughed at the gate will need something only you can give. Not because you engineered it, not because you schemed for it, but because the same current that carried you upward carried them nowhere, and eventually the nowhere runs out of room. The ones who mocked your climb will one day stand at the bottom of it and look up, and the person they'll have to ask is you. This isn't the revenge you used to picture, Chosen One. Revenge is something you chase. What's coming simply arrives on its own schedule, as the natural result of two paths diverging for long enough. Picture a single lit window high up in a dark building at night, warm and steady, while below it the street lies in shadow. For years the people in the street pointed at that window and laughed at whoever was foolish enough to keep the light burning so late, climbing so high, working when everyone else had gone to bed. Now the street is cold, and the light is still on, and one by one the ones who laughed find themselves looking up at the only warmth left on the block. They don't laugh at the window anymore. They wonder if whoever's up there might let them in. That window is you, and the ones who mocked the light are the ones who now need it most. You might ask yourself, won't it feel good, that moment? Won't it finally settle the score? And here is the strange truth I need you to hear, because it's the last test of who you've become. It won't feel the way you imagined. When it comes, you'll find the hunger for it has quietly left you, because people who have truly risen no longer need the ones below to acknowledge it. The pettiness that would have savoured it belonged to a smaller version of you, one you left behind somewhere on the climb. You'll help some of them or you won't, but either way the wound that needed their recognition will have already healed, and you'll realize the sweetest part was never their humbling, it was your own indifference to it. I've reached that reversal in my own life more than once, and I'll tell you honestly, it never landed the way the younger me expected. I spent years imagining the satisfaction of being needed by the ones who dismissed me. When it finally came, I felt almost nothing. And the nothing was the whole point. Their opinion had lost its currency entirely. You cannot be vindicated by people whose judgment no longer means anything to you. And the day their judgment stops mattering is the day you're truly free of them. It was never about them needing you. It was about you no longer needing them to need you. And by the time it arrived, that door in me had already closed. They'll look up at the window they mocked, and you'll be too far into your own life to bother looking down. That's the cruelest reversal of all, not the humbling, but the fact that by the time it comes, you won't even care. And that freedom, that indifference, points to the second to last truth, the one about what all of this was actually for. Number 14. None of it was happening to you. All of it was happening for you. Here is the truth that rearranges your entire past in a single stroke. Every single thing you catalogued as something done to you, the mockery, the doubt, the departures, the solitude, the wounds, the years that felt stolen, none of it was happening to you. All of it was happening for you. There is not one experience in your whole story, not one, that was wasted, random, or purely cruel. Each was a component. Each was being installed. The universe was not neglecting you during those hard years. It was constructing you. And construction from the inside always feels like being torn apart, because you cannot see the building while you're the one being built. Picture a finished cathedral seen from a height, every stone in its place, light pouring through windows that took lifetimes to set. Now imagine standing inside it during the years of its building, surrounded by scaffolding and dust and noise and things that looked like destruction, unable to see any of the beauty because you were standing in the middle of the work. That was your life. You experienced the scaffolding and the dust and called it suffering, because from the inside, in the middle of the construction, that's exactly what it looks like. But every stone that felt like it was crushing you was being set into a structure you couldn't yet see, a structure that was always you. You might ask yourself, how can I believe the painful things were for me, and not just meaningless pain I'm dressing up in meaning? Here is your answer, and it's the only one that holds. Look at what those things built. Look at the strength that came from the wound, the freedom that came from the departure, the depth that came from the solitude, the armor that came from being underestimated. You cannot point to a single one of your hardest experiences that didn't leave behind a capacity you now possess and could not have gotten any other way. That's not meaning imposed after the fact. That's the blueprint becoming visible now that the scaffolding is coming down. The pain was real, and yet the pain was also laying stone, and neither of those cancels the other. They stand together in the same story. This is the truth it took me longest to accept, because for years I wanted my suffering to be someone's fault, wanted it to be injustice, wanted it to be the universe failing me. It was easier to be a victim of my story than the subject of it. But when I finally looked back at the whole cathedral instead of the individual stones, I couldn't find a single hardship that hadn't become a foundation. Not one. The things I'd have deleted from my life if I could were the exact things holding up everything I now value about who I am. I stopped asking why it happened to me and started seeing what had happened to build. And that single shift changed my relationship to my entire past. Nothing was done to you, chosen one. Everything was done for you. The cathedral is nearly finished, and the scaffolding you mistook for ruin is coming down at last, and underneath it is the structure that was always the point. You weren't being broken. You were being built, and the building is almost complete. Which brings us finally back to the doorway, back to that cold workshop where we began. Back to the last truth, the one everything has been leading toward. Number 15. The laughter was the beginning of your legend, and now it's time to walk through the door. Return with me to that doorway at dawn. The man with his back to the world, the laughter frozen in the walls, the open door, and the grey morning light. I told you at the start there was something about that image I wouldn't explain until you were ready. You're ready now. Here it is. That man is not standing in the doorway to remember the laughter. He is standing there because that laughter was the opening line of his legend, and every legend needs the moment everyone said it couldn't be done, or there's no legend at all. The mockery at the gate wasn't the obstacle to his story. It was the first page of it, and he's about to walk through that door and begin every page that follows. Here is the truth they'll never admit, the one that completes the whole thing. Every legend you've ever admired began with a chapter exactly like yours. The doubt, the mockery, the wilderness years, the ones who left, the point where it made no sense to continue. That chapter isn't the exception in the story of greatness. It is the required opening. You cannot have the triumph without the doubt that makes it a triumph. You cannot have the rise without the depth that makes it a rise. The laughter you carried as a wound was, the entire time, the necessary beginning of a story that could not exist without it. They didn't ruin your legend. They started it. You might ask yourself one last time, is this real, or is this just a beautiful thing to believe? Let me settle it for you. It's real, and the proof is in what you do next. Walk through the door, not metaphorically. Today, do the next hard thing, the one you've been circling. Take the step you've been waiting for permission to take, and let this be the permission. Because the difference between a beautiful belief and a true one is entirely a matter of whether you act on it, and the moment you move, the story becomes real in the only way that matters, which is that you make it real by living it. I have spent my whole life reading people in 10 seconds, and I told you at the beginning you were the kind who rises. I need you to understand I wasn't flattering you. I was reporting what I saw. Everything in this story, every one of these 15 truths, was already true about you before you heard a word of it. I didn't give you any of this. I just described what was already there, the way you describe a building that's already standing. The laughter, the sharpening, the solitude, the patience, the silence, the underestimation, the reversal, the construction, the launch, the point of no return already behind you. All of it, already yours. You were never the one they laughed out of the room. You were the one they'll tell stories about after you're gone. So stand up now, chosen one. Feel the door in front of you. Feel the laughter frozen in the walls behind you, and understand at last that it was never mocking you. It was announcing you. The workshop is warm again. The forge is lit. And the only thing left in the entire story is for you to walk through the door and become the thing they said you'd never be, which was always, from the very first day, exactly what you were. Walk through it. The story is yours now, and the first move of the rest of it is a single step you take the moment this ends. Take it.